Welcome to the deep dive. This is where we take a stack of sources, could be articles, research, notes, you name it, and we really plunge in.
Yeah, our goal is always to pull out the absolute must-know information.
Distill it down, clarify it, and give you those essential insights. We're aiming for that aha moment, maybe some surprising facts.
And hopefully keep it interesting, maybe even a bit fun along the way.
Think of us as your guides, helping you navigate through all this information.
Highlighting the important bits and, crucially, explaining why they're significant, not just what they are.
Exactly. And for this particular deep dive, we have a really focused mission. Our source material today is foundational. It actually comes directly from the University of London LLB module.
That's the one, International Protection of Human Rights.
Right. And we need to be super clear right up front. This session, this deep dive, it's purely for educational purposes.
Yeah, strictly educational. It's designed specifically to support you if you happen to be studying this very module.
Helping you get to grips with the core ideas, the study advice, all drawn straight from these introductory materials provided by the university.
And we should also mention, this deep dive is brought to you by Sinorbit Academy, Sri Lanka.
Yes, a big thanks to them for their support in making this possible.
And from both of us here, and I'm sure from Sinorbit Academy too, we really want to offer our very best wishes. Good luck to all of you students getting ready for your exams.
Absolutely. We genuinely hope this session is helpful for your studies.
So what's the plan for today?
Okay. Our mission is to dive deep into the very beginning, the introductory guide for studying International Protection of Human Rights, or IPHR as we'll probably call it.
Makes sense.
We're going to unpack this guide section by section. We'll look for the core insights it offers about, what IPHR is all about, its challenges.
Highlight the recommended study approach, the key resources it points you to.
And then, really importantly, distill that practical, hands-on advice for exam prep and, how to handle the exam itself.
The goal being to make those key concepts and practical tips really stick, ready for your study journey ahead.
Right. So let's start with the foundation, understanding what this IPHR module guide actually is and how the source says you should use it.
Okay, so the guide is positioned as your main reference, your sort of focal point for the whole module.
Your starting point for everything.
Exactly. Its main job is to help you understand this, frankly, quite vast subject.
And it does this by taking you carefully, step by step, through each part of IPHR, chapter by chapter, like a roadmap.
A roadmap, yeah, providing structure and context for all the other reading you'll do.
But it's not just for reading, is it? The source says it's designed for active learning.
That's a key point. It includes activities and sample questions throughout. These are meant as, like, pause points.
Stop and think moments.
Precisely. Moments for you to stop, digest what you've just read, and really think about the issues, the concepts being presented. It's about engaging, not just absorbing.
Like built-in checks for understanding. And the source stresses something else right away. Studying IPHR law isn't just some abstract academic thing.
No, definitely not. The legal discussions are deeply connected to what's happening in the world, social, political, economic events globally.
So staying in touch with current events is important.
The source says it's essential. Understanding the current context of human rights issues around the world actually helps ease you into the subject and makes it feel more real, more relevant.
Makes sense. Because human rights issues are always in the news, always evolving, the guide suggests keeping up with reputable news sources.
Yeah, major national or international papers, reliable global organizations like the BBC, CNN, Al Jazeera sources you trust.
But there's a warning, too, isn't there? About bias.
A crucial caveat, yes. You always need to be careful about bias in reporting. You have to be discerning.
So rely only on reputable, trustworthy sources. Learning to filter that information is a skill in itself.
Absolutely critical in this field. Being aware of potential biases is key. And the source suggests this awareness of current events isn't just for context.
It actually makes studying it more interesting.
Yeah, it can stimulate your enjoyment because you see the connection between the legal principles and, well, real life, real people.
Okay. So after working through these introductory materials, what should you, the student, expect to be able to do? What are the learning outcomes?
Right, the guide sets out clear goals for this initial phase. You should feel equipped to approach studying IPHR systematically.
Know how to study it.
Exactly. Understand what the different bits of your study materials. The guide chapters, the activities, the readings are actually for how they help.
And ultimately, the aim is to start your deeper study of IPHR feeling confident.
Right. This whole intro phase is about building that foundation, confidence, and method for the journey ahead.
Okay, so that's the how to study. Now let's unpack the what. Specifically, the source jumps right into the dual nature, the core paradoxes of studying IPHR. This is in section 1.1.
Yeah, it says studying human rights law can be, on the one hand, the most exciting and inspiring area of law.
The promise of it all.
Exactly. The promise of protecting individuals, just because they're human, from arbitrary, tyrannical power. Upholding dignity. That's the powerful, hopeful side.
That's what draws people in. But then there's the flip side.
The frustration. The source is pretty blunt here. It says the reality of rights often falls far, far short of that ideal.
Commitments made by governments, often just words.
Frequently just rhetoric is the word the source uses. Grand statements, but maybe not much action behind them.
And this leads to another challenging point the source makes.
Which is that it's often politically easier to point fingers, to accuse your opponents of human rights abuses, than it is to genuinely tackle the issues within your own country.
Which kind of reveals that human rights can be, and often are, used as, well, an ideological weapon in global politics.
Right, and this isn't new. The source gives a really important historical example. The Cold War.
Ah, yes. How did that play out?
Well, during the Cold War, human rights became a sort of battleground. Western states would loudly condemn abuses in the Soviet bloc.
Using it to undermine those regimes.
Exactly. But at the same time, they often conveniently overlooked pretty serious human rights problems in countries that were aligned with them, the so-called free world.
So it wasn't always about genuine concern. Politics trumped principles sometimes.
Often it was strategic, a political tool. And this historical context is vital because it shows how political agendas can overshadow the actual principles.
And the source says this dynamic isn't just history, right? It's still relevant.
Very much so. It specifically mentions the war on terror as a contemporary issue that significantly impacted the international politics of human rights.
Raising complex questions about things like detention, surveillance.
The balance between security and liberty,
Yeah.
it shows this challenge, this politicization is ongoing. It hasn't gone away.
Okay. And this leads us to what the source calls the fundamental paradox, the core tension right at the heart of the whole international system for protecting human rights. You said we really need to grasp this one.
Yes, this is absolutely key. The paradox is this. The international mechanisms we have, the treaties, the UN bodies, the courts, they all ultimately depend on the cooperation and the will of sovereign states.
Wait, the whole point of human rights law is to limit the power of those exact same sovereign states.
Precisely. That's the conflict. The state is the entity whose power human rights law is trying to constrain.
So the system relies on the potential violator to also be the enforcer.
That's the heart of the paradox, yes.
Hmm.
International human rights law operates on the premise that the state, often responsible for violations, is also seen as the main protector and is held accountable by mechanisms that the state itself agreed to.
It feels inherently contradictory.
It is. And the source explains this had real consequences. In the early UN years, many governments were pretty lukewarm about international human rights commitments.
Why? Because they didn't want outside interference.
Exactly. They were wary of having their internal affairs, even their external actions, subjected to international scrutiny. That fear of scrutiny by sovereign states is a constant challenge.
So the fundamental problem, to reiterate, is asking these powerful sovereign states to willingly limit their own power for the sake of human rights.
Understanding that structural tension is absolutely key to analyzing how well or how poorly the system works.
Okay, despite this big paradox, the source does acknowledge some success, right, in getting commitments.
Yes, it notes a marked degree of success in securing commitment to core documents. It specifically mentions the 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the UDHR.
Everyone studying this needs to know the UDHR inside out.
Absolutely fundamental. And then the legally binding covenants and treaties that followed, which spell out those rights in more detail, like the ICCPR and ICSCR.
But even with widespread agreement on paper, the source says there's still suspicion.
Yeah, a persistent suspicion remains. Nations might find ways to opt out of rights they find inconvenient, maybe through reservations to treaties.
Limiting their obligations.
Or, and this is a really critical distinction the source makes, they might enter into what it calls paper commitments.
Paper commitments, that sounds like signing up but not really meaning it.
Essentially, yeah.
Yeah.
It means they ratify the treaty, make the legal commitment internationally, but then they don't actually put the necessary resources, laws, or political will in place domestically to make those rights real for their people.
Ah, so there's a gap between signing the treaty ratification and actually making it work on the ground implementation.
Exactly. That gap between ratification and implementation is a major challenge, and the source links this back to broader global politics.
Even though the Cold War is over, politics still heavily influence human rights.
Yes, the political landscape has changed, but human rights are still often caught up in complex political and ideological struggles. This tension isn't going anywhere soon.
Okay, so beyond the political paradoxes, the source also points to complexity within the law itself.
It does. It mentions the potential for proliferation and duplication between different treaties and bodies within the UN system.
So it can seem a bit confusing with overlapping mandates.
It can certainly seem that way at first. And the source also highlights the need to distinguish between the global UN system and the various regional systems like in Europe, Africa, the Americas. Understanding these different layers is important.
And why is it so complex?
Partly, the source explains, because human rights law wasn't created in one go. It developed piece by piece, treaty by treaty, over time, incrementally, which naturally leads to some overlap and complexity.
So knowing that upfront helps you approach the material with the right mindset, ready to organize it.
Exactly. Given these challenges, let's switch gears now and look at how the source advises you to approach your study systematically. This is section 1.2.
And the first big point here is about context, historical context.
Yes, the guide really hammers this home. It says it cannot be stressed enough. To understand current human rights events accurately, you must see them in their broader historical context.
Things happening now are usually part of longer trends.
Almost always. This holistic historical view is a key methodological point for studying IPHR.
Okay, so how should you use the guide itself?
The guide is designed to be your first port of call for each topic. The recommended approach is read the main chapter text carefully, then read the associated core readings.
And then you get to the activities. You mentioned these are pause points.
Right. Deliberate pauses for digestion and critical thinking. Engage with the material actively.
And there's specific advice about the activity feedback, isn't there?
Crucial advice. Don't read the feedback right away. Attempt the activity first. Use it to test your own understanding.
Only after you've tried it yourself should you look at the feedback.
Yes. Then you can check your thinking, see if you're on the right track, understand the expected approach. It's about learning, not just finding the answer.
Okay, and the source lays out a whole study cycle for each chapter.
It does, a very specific step-by-step structure. Chapter text, core readings, attempt activities, review feedback, then move to essential reading, reflect and reread, maybe revisit activities feedback, tackle further reading, more reflection rereading, and finally, try the sample exam questions.
Wow, that's quite a detailed process. It really emphasizes the sequential nature.
Yes, the source is clear. Dipping in and out randomly won't work well. Later chapters assume you've understood the earlier ones. You need that structured, sequential approach.
And it's not just about the guide, right? You need to look beyond it.
Absolutely. The source strongly encourages you to actively expand your understanding. IPHR is dynamic. It's constantly changing.
So you need to keep track of new cases.
Definitely.
There.
Monitor case developments from international courts, the European Court, the Inter-American Court, and even important national court decisions interpreting human rights.
And watch for reforms, changes to the system.
Monitor reform initiatives, yes. And critically, seek out new academic writing on IPHR, recent articles, books. Scholars are constantly analyzing and debating.
And the goal of all this extra work?
It's about fleshing out your understanding, getting different perspectives, and importantly, developing your own independent thought. This isn't just about learning rules. It's about becoming an analyst, a critic, moving from passive absorption to active legal thinking.
Right, becoming a critical thinker in the field.
Yeah.
Okay, to help with all this, the source lists essential resources. Let's go through those recommendations. Section 1.2.1.
First up, the core texts. And the advice here is pretty strong. You are strongly advised to buy both of the core textbooks listed.
Okay, 2 essential purchases. What are they?
First is International Human Rights Law. Cases, materials, commentary by Olivier de Schutter. The source calls it a very good book, covers most things well. You're looking for the 3rd edition, 2019.
De Schutter. Got it. And the second one?
The second is International Human Rights, Law and Practice by Ilias Bentekis and Lutzoet. Described as interesting, also covers most issues well, maybe not quite everything on the guide. Again, 3rd edition, 2020 for that one.
Bantekas and Ouet. Okay, so De Schutter and Bantekas and Ouet, buy both if you can.
That's the strong advice. Next, essential reading. Here, regular reference is made to international human rights by Philip Alston and Ryan Goodman.
Alston and Goodman, how's
Yeah.
that described?
Superb, thought-provoking, comprehensive. But there's a big but. The edition mentioned, 2012, is now quite dated for some things.
Okay, so be aware of that.
And some students apparently finding tangents a bit,
Hmm.
but it's broader, more reflective, and you're strongly advised to have access to it. Maybe share a copy or use the library.
Still waiting on that new edition, then.
Apparently so. Now, besides Alston and Goodman, the source says you need access to at least one other book listed under essential reading. A key one mentioned is International Human Rights Law, an edited collection by Moakley, Shah, and Sivakumaran.
An essay collection.
Yes. Described as a superb collection, excellent for supplementing the main textbooks. Look for the third edition, 2017.
Okay, quick recap. Buy De Schutter and Bantekas and Ouet. Get access to Alston and Goodman and at least one other, like the Moakley collection. Those are the main texts.
Correct. Then there are further references, things you'll be pointed to for specific topics. This includes major handbooks.
Like encyclopedias for specific areas?
Sort of. One is the Oxford Handbook of International Human Rights Law, edited by Dinah Shelton. Not a textbook, but superb essays, often available via the online library.
And the other?
The Rowledge Handbook of International Human Rights Law, edited by Sheeran and Rodley. Again, superb discussions. And the source points to online library access for this one, too. You'll likely use specific chapters from these.
Got it. What about the actual treaties, the primary sources?
Yes, documents, books. This is really important for practical study. These are collections of the key treaties and documents you'll constantly need. The UDHR, ICCPR, ACECR, Convention Against Torture, etc.
The source admits you can find these online for free.
It does. Simple searches work, and the Alston and Goodman online supplement is a start, though not complete. However, the source strongly advises obtaining a published collection.
Why buy it if it's free online?
Usability and familiarity. Published collections from places like Oxford or Cambridge University Press are generally easier to use, more reliable. Having a physical book or a well-formatted digital one lets you really learn your way around the treaties.
Find articles quickly, see the structure.
Exactly. Become genuinely familiar with the actual text of the key treaties just by flicking through or navigating easily. That familiarity is fundamental. You need to know these documents.
Makes sense. Okay, online resources.
Two key ones highlighted. First, the UN Audiovisual Library, the source, gives the specific URL, described as outstanding.
What's in there?
Superb lectures by top experts, loads of documents on human rights and refugee law. You're encouraged to explore it often.
And the second online resource.
The official website of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, OHCHR. That's at www.ohchr.org, a super resource.
What does that give you access to?
Direct links to all the key UN human rights bodies,
Mm.
reports, general comments, plus the texts of treaties and documents. You should consult it regularly for primary info and updates.
Okay. The guide also mentions even more reading.
Yeah, under further reading on international human rights law, it lists other very good books, some in the online library, covering specific systems or topics more deeply.
Like what?
Mentions include a Cambridge Companion, essays, a classic text on the European Convention on Human Rights by Harris et al., described as doctrinal, so focus on legal rules.
Okay.
Also, a collection on the ICCPR by Joseph and Kesten called Legalistic, so strict legal interpretation, and a superb paperback collection on the ICGHCR by Saul, Kinley, and Mowbray.
So, ICCPR and ICCR, the two big covenants from the UDHR, knowing them is core.
Absolutely core. Civil and political rights in the ICCPR, economic, social, and cultural rights in the ICCR. You need to know what's in both.
And finally, the guide links IPHR to its parent field.
Right. It notes IPHR is a specialism of public international law, PIL. While the guide covers some necessary PIL, if you want a deeper understanding of that broader framework.
It recommends a standard PIL textbook.
Yes, suggests either Malcolm Shaw's International Law or Jan Klaber's International Law. Provides the edition details for both.
Okay, so that's a comprehensive list of resources. Using them systematically is clearly key.
Fundamental to success in this module, yes.
All right, we've covered the subject's nature, the study method, the resources. Now, let's talk about the big one, the examination. Section 1.3. And the source starts with some very direct advice about preparation.
Incredibly direct. It basically says, no amount of last-minute study will solve the problem of a lack of preparation. You must begin your examination preparation from the first day the module begins.
Wow, okay. No messing around there. You cannot cram for this.
That's the clear message. It requires consistent effort over the whole year.
So what are the practical steps for effective prep, starting from day one?
Clear guidance here. First, as you read, take careful, condensed notes of everything. Don't just highlight. Process it, summarize it in your own words.
Active note-taking.
Second, after each section or reading, go back and identify the absolute key points. The source calls them memory triggers.
Like bullet points or flashcards?
Could be, yeah. Writing them down helps distill the core info, making it much easier to recall later during revision.
Third, and this sounds non-negotiable, practice questions.
Absolutely. Use the samples in the guide, but crucially, go beyond them. You must practice answering old University of London LOB exam questions for this IPHR module.
And how should you practice?
With discipline. Simulate actual exam conditions. Give yourself the correct time allowed per question, including time for reading and planning.
Doing that repeatedly builds exam fitness.
Exactly. Stamina, comfort with the pressure, and timing. It's vital.
The source also advises planning your whole study year.
Yes, proactively. Use a diary, plan each week, schedule time for reading, notes, activities.
And review time.
Crucially, yes, include time for weekly review. And also, set aside time at the end of each month for a broader review of that month's work.
Spaced repetition, basically. Much better for long-term memory.
Far more effective than cramming. And the source clarifies the exam's purpose, too.
It's not testing everything you know.
No, it's testing your ability to answer specific questions on IPHR on that one day. Consistent revision throughout the year maximizes your chances of performing well on that day.
And there's advice about looking after yourself, too.
Yes, really important practical advice. Prioritize your well-being. You need to be physically and mentally well.
Don't just work constantly.
No. Eat well, sleep enough, and importantly, include social time and physical activity. Burnout is real. Managing health is part of effective study.
Okay, now let's zoom in on the final revision period, say, starting 3 months before the exam. The source calls this the examination revision schedule.
Right. By this point, assuming you've worked consistently, you should have good notes ready. Now you need a detailed schedule for these final months.
And a big decision needs to be made.
The crucial decision. What specific topics will you revise in detail for the exam? This needs careful, strategic thinking.
And there's a warning about trying to guess the minimum number of topics.
A very clear warning. Don't revise only the bare minimum you think you need. It makes you incredibly vulnerable.
What if those topics aren't on the paper? Or they're combined unexpectedly?
Exactly. You're left with little or no choice. It's risky.
So what's the recommendation?
The source strongly recommends. If you're well prepared with good notes, plan to revise a minimum of 6 distinct areas or topics in detail.
Minimum of 6? Why 6?
It gives you much more flexibility and safety on the day. More choice means you're more likely to find questions you can answer really well.
And this final revision schedule must include
more practice. Dedicated time slots for practicing old exam questions under strict conditions. Keep doing it right up to the exam.
So preparation is clearly a marathon, requires diligence, strategy, practice, and self-care.
All of those things, yes.
Okay, you've prepared, you've revised. Now, what about the day itself? Strategy on the day, section 1.3.2. What's the advice here?
It's very practical. The night before, if possible, take it off. Relax.
Don't cram.
Avoid it. If you absolutely must revise, finish early. Get a good night's sleep. Trust the work you've done.
Morning of the exam?
Brief review of keynotes is okay, but then put them away. The source confidently says you don't need them now if you have done the work. Relax.
Been getting there.
Allow plenty time for travel. Avoid stress. Arrive calm with time to spare.
Okay, you're in the exam hall. Paper arrives. First step.
Read the whole paper, every single question. Read them very carefully before making any decisions. Understand all your options.
Then choosing questions. Don't just pick your favorite topic.
No, that's the key strategic advice. Don't just pick your favorite. Evaluate which questions are easiest for you to answer well and maximize your marks.
A slightly less interesting topic might have an easier question.
Exactly. Be strategic about where you can score highest.
Once you've chosen.
Before writing, draw up a brief plan for each chosen question. Your roadmap for the answer. Helps structure and ensures you cover key points.
Okay, and then comes perhaps the most critical advice.
Timing. Absolutely. Critically essential. You must divide the total exam time precisely between the questions you're answering.
How should you divide it?
Allocate specific time for a reading and planning source, suggests about 5 minutes per question. Then the main block for writing the answer. And a few minutes at the end for review, maybe 5 minutes total or a minute per question.
And the really strict part.
Stick rigidly to this timing. That means you stop writing immediately when the time you allotted for that question is up. Don't go over by even a minute.
Why so strict? It feels counterintuitive to stop mid-sentence.
The reasoning is powerful. It's much harder to get those extra few difficult marks from a question you've already spent, say, 40 minutes on. You've likely got the easier marks already.
So it's better to move on.
Far better, far more strategic, to stop even if it feels unfinished and move to a fresh question where lots of easier marks are still available at the beginning. Don't sacrifice a whole new question for marginal gains on one you've nearly finished. Timing is everything for maximizing your total score.
That's a really crucial exam technique point. Okay, finally, let's talk about the art of answering the question. Section 1.3.3. The source starts with a golden rule.
And repeats it forcefully. Your number one aim is to answer the question asked. Simple, clear.
And failing to do this is the main reason people fail.
That's what the source states, unequivocally. It's the biggest pitfall.
So how do you make sure you're doing it?
Constantly ask yourself while planning and writing, am I answering this specific question? Keep checking back.
And what should you not do?
Almost never. For an essay question, are you just being asked for a general description or overview? Don't just dump everything you know about a topic.
The source warns you'll fail if you do that for essays.
Yes, a stark warning. Law exams, including this one, are about reasoned argument. You need to think like a lawyer.
Not just personal opinion.
No, it's about building a case. Recognizing strengths and weaknesses in arguments, but arguing consistently and persuasively for your analysis, supported by evidence.
Okay. The source distinguishes between two question types, problem and essay.
Right. Problem questions are seen as more straightforward in task. The strategy, apply the relevant law to the specific facts given.
How do you approach that?
Look at what you're asked to do, advise X, discuss compatibility. That tells you which facts are relevant. Then work through the scenario line by line, identify facts, identify the law, apply law to facts, answer the specific query.
A methodical application exercise.
Exactly. Essay questions, though, are often trickier.
Why? More scope to waffle.
Precisely. Easier to drift into that general discussion the source warns against.
So the strategy for essays.
Read carefully. Identify the area. Then analyze the question itself deeply. Break it down. Ask, what specifically am I being asked here? And how can I best answer this precise point?
And a tip to stay focused.
Try using the keywords from the question in your very first sentence. Forces you to address that question immediately and helps keep you on track.
Okay. The source gives a hypothetical example. Something about UN enforcement.
Yes. Before one assesses the effectiveness of the UN system for the enforcement of human rights, one has to be clear about the meaning of enforcement. Discuss.
That sounds tricky. It's not just asking how effective is the UN system.
Exactly not. That's the trap. The focus isn't a general overview of the UN system. The focus is the difficult concept of enforcement.
So you have to argue about the statement itself.
Yes.
Right.
Argue for or against the premise. Is clarity on the meaning of enforcement truly necessary before you can assess effectiveness?
You have to take a side.
You need to present a clear argument, yes. It doesn't matter which side you take, but you must substantiate it thoroughly. Use cases, treaties, state actions, UN resolutions, academic commentary on what enforcement could mean and how that impacts assessing effectiveness.
Maintain consistency in your argument.
And if you hit areas of uncertainty in the law, which is common,
What do you do then?
identify the uncertainty clearly. Then offer your substantiated opinion, your reasoned view, backed by materials on which interpretation is more persuasive or how the law should develop, and always, always keep checking. Am I still answering the actual question?
And finally, remember basic essay structure.
Yes. Beginning, introduce your argument. Middle, detail, analysis, evidence. And conclude, maybe restate argument. Helps keep it focused and coherent.
Okay, so just to quickly loop back to the learning outcomes from this intro section.
Right. The goal was to equip you to approach IPHR studies systematically, understand how to use the materials, and basically start your studies with confidence, knowing the challenges but also the methods.
And the source ends this whole intersection with a simple message.
Good luck, which we echo.
Absolutely. We've covered a huge amount today, really digging into this introductory guide for the University of London LLB IPHR module. We've touched on the subject's complex nature, inspiring ideals versus frustrating realities.
The political dimension. Human rights as an ideological weapon, that fundamental paradox of sovereign states.
the complexity within the law itself, proliferation, and duplication.
Then we dug into the practical study advice, historical context, using the guide and activities properly, systematic study, expanding your understanding beyond the core texts.
Developing that independent thought, we detailed the essential resources, those core texts, like De Schutter, Bontekas, and Owet.
Essential readings like Alston and Goodman, Moakley et al., the handbooks, the crucial document collections, those key online resources like the UN Library and OHCHR site.
And then we spent a lot of time on mastering the examination, that message about starting prep from day one.
Taking good notes, memory triggers, practicing past papers under time conditions, planning your revision strategically minimum 6 topics, and looking after your well-being.
And the exam day strategy. Relax beforehand, travel early, read the whole paper, choose questions strategically for marks, plan answers, and that critical point. Stick rigidly to your timing.
And finally, the art of answering. Always answer the specific question asked. Think like a lawyer, build a reasoned argument, apply law to facts and problems, analyze the question deeply in essays.
Phew. Okay, just to reiterate, this deep dive was purely for educational purposes, designed to support students on that University of London LLB module using their fantastic introductory materials.
Huge thanks again to the University of London for making these available, and of course to Sinorbit Academy Sri Lanka for the
Yeah.
support in bringing this session to you.
And once again, from both of us, truly all the very best with your studies and especially with your exams. Remember the advice. Start early, be systematic, use your resources, practice timed questions, stay healthy.
And on the day, read carefully, plan, time rigidly, and answer the question. Apply that, and you'll give yourself the best possible chance.
Definitely. So, to leave you with a final thought, building directly on what we discussed from the source material, the source explicitly says human rights are often used as an ideological weapon and commitments can be mere rhetoric. Given that, what active steps can you, as a student, take during your study process to critically analyze this? How can you try to cut through the politics and get a clearer sense of the real effectiveness, or maybe the lack of effectiveness, of international human rights law in practice?
That's a really crucial question to keep in mind as you go deeper into the subject. It shapes how you evaluate everything.
Something to mull over. That's all for this deep dive. Thanks for joining us.
Study well, and good luck.
See you next time on the Deep Dive.